We have a summit taking place at the end of this week in Brussels. All the leaders will be there. The big question is, what will they be talking about? As I mentioned before the break, the Germans see this as a migration summit. The Brits see it as the summit in which we get a deal that will allow Cameron to campaign on an in-vote. Let's talk about all of this. Respublica Director Phillip Blond still with us, as is Eric Nielsen. Phillip Blond, good morning.
Good morning.
We have this dichotomy. We have this sort of weird entrance into the council building in Brussels later on this week. The Germans are walking in going, we're going to be trying to figure out what's happening with the migration story. That's what we need to fix. Certainly that's what the German papers are saying. Yet the Brits are going there trying to get a deal. Europe's not talking about the Brexit. What's going on?
Well, we've got different agendas. We've got Europe facing what in many ways is an existential crisis over migration in general, and the Germans are facing it in particular with Merkel's decision just to open the doors. But what I think is dangerous is they think they can squeeze Britain further, and I think that's a terrible miscalculation, because all the polls show that if Cameron campaigns for a Brit exit, it's likely that the vote to stay in will win. But if they actually take his deal, which has been shredded in Britain, and shred it further, then actually it looks like the vote for staying in will be much narrower and much more contested, and Europe will miss a golden opportunity to keep what will be its most populous country by 2050, its largest economy, the only country that can defend the security of Europe, the only country that has the military and the vision and the will to use it in Europe to actually defend European borders. Now, Cameron has made, I think, a clever ploy that the vote to stay in is a patriotic vote, and it's a security vote to both defend Europe against Russia, a Russia that is increasingly dangerous, and Islam and migration.
Is that going to be enough to get him the deal that he needs to come back home and say, I want to stay in, and the British people to vote for it?
I think not, but I think that if...
So you think we get a Brexit?
I think it's getting too close to call now. I think the smart money still says we're going to vote to stay in, but we all remember the polls from the British general election that got everything wrong. The online polling says we're going to vote to go out. The telephone polling says we're going to vote to stay in. But here's the rub. There is a deal to be made, and it's the deal to be made around security. What Britain needs to do is not leave but lead. We need Cameron to step up to the plate with some visionary ideas. I've argued elsewhere that what we need to set up along the North African coast are charter cities, places that have legal rights where migrants can go to trade with Europe, to learn from Europe, that are secure. Unless we do this, estimates say that about 40 million people are going to cross the Mediterranean. That level of migration will shatter Europe, and Europe so far has singly failed to deliver anything. And we need Britain to show vision and leadership, and if Cameron can do that, then Cameron, I think, can position himself as the leader of Europe, and people in Britain would vote for British leadership.
Wow. That's just digesting all of that, trying to figure out exactly. There's no sign of that whatsoever.
And there's the problem. Here's what Cameron, I think, risks doing a pragmatism that actually could fail. But if he actually followed with his own beliefs, and I think he's right to argue for the rights of non-Euro members, and creates a leadership and vision strategy around migration. And remember, Cameron was right about migrants where Merkel was wrong. And he said that we need to deal with these people in their home countries. So why not strengthen that? Why not come up with visionary proposals how we can secure migrants in their home countries and create an outreach policy? But what we see is both a failure of EU leadership, who are just talking about fences. They're even in the show of solidarity talking about walling off Greece. That is a tragic failure. And if Cameron actually grasped the nettle and talked about visionary British leadership about stabilising migrants in their home locales, then we have British leadership that answers the migrant crisis. And I think that's the way forward for Cameron to win. At the moment, this looks like a conspiracy of mediocrity, and that is risky, because then the British might vote for Brit exit.
Philip, you're one of Britain's great thinkers on Anglican theology and history. You were talking there about charter cities. It reminded me, and Eric Nielsen sitting to you is from Denmark, it reminded reminded me of it's like Wolf Hall and Thomas Cromwell in relationships between the cities of Europe and the cities of the United Kingdom. In this moment of 2016, is England's debate on Brexit being led by what in America we would call a plutocracy, a Gilded Age elite, however you want to call it, is the pro-Cameron people removed from the people of the United Kingdom?
Here's the trouble. All global trends show that globalization has essentially destroyed the working class in the world. That's why people in America are going for Donald Trump. If you believe the clever people about the march of the robots, and I think they are clever, something like 50 to 70% of middle-class jobs will go. So there is in the developed world enormous economic and cultural insecurity that nobody's speaking to. So what we have is that the people who are winning are the reactionaries, the negatives, the racists, the withdrawal candidate, and we lack visionary leadership about what we could and should do. And I think the British role, and Britain has always been greater than herself, is actually to step up to the plate and talk about a vision of Britain and a vision of Europe that can go together. And the trouble with those who remain pro-EU is they're making a narrow economic argument based on fear. And there's no visionary argument. And Europe itself is in existential crisis. It's in cultural crisis. I think it's in ongoing economic crisis.
Yep.
Until we solve that, who knows?
Right. Phil, I agree with a lot of that. What I want to know is the elite sipping cocktails at the Dorchester or Claridge. Guys like Guy Johnson, and he's down at Claridge's 6 nights a week. But the basic idea, Philip, how does Cameron attach those elites to the struggle of the people of the United Kingdom that want to support their prime minister? What's your to-do list?
The to-do list is for the elites to go with the basic expansive patriotism of the British people. The British people have always believed that Britain has a leading and world culture that it needs to support. And I've advised privately and publicly that the way to win this debate is to make it a patriotic debate. The slogan is lead, not leave. And if you can say to the British people, you have been great in almost every modern century, great in the 21st century because you can lead Europe. You will have the largest population, the largest economy. You have the world's most important city. Why would you give this up? Why would you give up leading Europe? But here's the terrible thing. Nobody is making this argument. What we have is a conspiracy of mediocrity. We have a narrow economic argument. And I think this is a terrible failure in the making.
Phil, just one final thought, if we could, and I think this is so important. The people of the United Kingdom have one part they want to be in, one part they want to be out. State the case for confidence in London, that there's no substitute on the continent for London, and if we go back 400, 500 years, London is London, and just go with it and exit. State that case.
Well, the case for those who want to leave is essentially the European Union is a failing institution economically, socially and culturally, and we're tied into something that's failing, and as a result we're hidebound, we're prevented from trading, we're prevented from being our entrepreneurial selves. I think that's mythological, I think that's silly. The idea that the Chinese would somehow strike a free trade agreement with us rather than a nation of 550 million people is farcical. But I think the real key is the idea of patriotism, and Brexit appeals to the idea that we're being held back by Brussels bureaucrats, by people who want to give rights to terrorists, by people who want to flood our borders. But if you make the broader patriotic argument that isn't being made, that actually the key to Britain's greatness in the 21st century, the key to British influence is leading in Europe, and people want us to lead. You know, the Franco-German axis isn't that powerful. Many of the new countries are desperate for British leadership. What we have is almost, since Tony Blair, and this is a tragedy, a retreat from British global leadership. And I think that's our great failing.
Eric, let me just jump you into this conversation. There does seem to be this view that Europe is not looking at this threat seriously. And that may be a view here in the UK, but it is certainly a view that you talk to people around Europe. Is that the case? Is that your view? You talk to a lot of people in different capitals. They're looking at migration. They're saying that's the threat. They're not looking at Brexit in the same way.
I think that's right, but at the same time, I think there's a great degree of irritation in Berlin and Paris and in Rome that Cameron is using Europe to deal with a domestic issue, even inside his own party. And there is only so much you can do. I mean, we would sort of talk about the big strategic discussions, but it has become a deal about 4 small things, and what are they really? So it's almost like
I think our house is burning down. Why aren't you helping?
Yeah, no, that's right. And you said it very well. I mean, we have gone through years now where British leadership in the world has almost disappeared. So leadership. Where have Britain been, for example, in the Minsk II? Well, now it's falling apart. But Britain is nowhere to see in dealing with the Middle East and the refugees. Nowhere to deal with the Ukraine. Right. So from Berlin's point of view, it's not so clear that this they want Britain in, but at the right level.
We've got to wrap this conversation up.
Well, with
Eric,
terrific
Philip,
respect.
thank you very much.
I'm sorry, Guy. Very good. Thank you so much, Phillip Blond with Res Publica as well. We'll continue with Dr. Nielsen.